Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm reviewing a Vue UI component library called Vuetensils by demoing this small shop application that I built with Vuetensils. It's more of a demo and less of a code along, but all of the code is available on GitHub and it's linked below in the description. Hi and welcome back to Faraday Academy. If you are new here, my name is Gwen and I make lots of videos and do live streams on programming and other developer related content. So if you are into that, then be sure and subscribe to my channel. To demonstrate the Vuetensils library, I built this bare bones shop application. This is basically the home page. There are a couple products you can click add to cart and there's this little pop-up. There's a menu, which is a draw menu that slides out from the side. I can close it or I can navigate. This is the past purchases page with a table, and I can click and filter the table by any of these columns. And there's also a cart page. Now these items on the side aren't quite spaced evenly, but that's my own styling problem. It has nothing to do with Vuetensils. And then there's a checkout form here. So we can talk about some of the form options in Vuetensils. So Vuetensils calls itself a naked component library for Vue.js. There are many other UI component libraries. There's Element UI, Vuetify, Incline, Quasar, and a whole bunch of other popular ones. What sets Vuetensils apart and why it's called naked is that it doesn't have a whole bunch of styling and design baked into it. It basically handles accessibility and functionality for you without designing anything. In other words, your components are going to look really ugly if you don't either provide your own styles or import some kind of other CSS design class library like Foundation, Bootstrap, or the newer ones, Tailwind and Tachyon. And you can see these really are naked HTML5 components by looking at a couple of the examples. So I'm going to go to VInput. To start, it shows you basically how to use the component. This is what it looks like with this added styling, because it does give you classes for these components that you can add your own styles to. And this is basically what it looks like without styling. In other words, exactly what these things would look like in the browser if you just stuck a regular input element in there yourself. The basic styles that you'll see throughout this application are actually done with the Foundation site's design framework, and I've added classes into the components just to make it look a little bit better. And I am also using their grid for the layout of these pages because Vuetensils doesn't have its own grid like some other UI component libraries. So let's look at what's happening on this page first. There's a plain title here and then a popular product section. And these products have images. Now, these images are using the vimage component provided by Vuetensils. So it's using this vimg component, and what it does is basically support lazy loading and animating the images into the screen as you scroll for better accessibility and load times. So I'm going to show you how this works with these images here. You go into Components. And in that popular items section, here is the vimage tag that's loading this image from my public directory, dice.jpg. And right now I only have 3 on the page, but I can loop through this array and make as many as I want. So instead of 3, I'm going to replace this 5, make it 50. And now there are 50 of these cards. So actually as I scroll, you're going to see them fading in so they don't all load at once. So I'll change this back now. So that's a really cool feature that's just provided by default by the image tag. And you can see I don't have any extra styling here. And all I'm using is the image tag as it comes out of the box. Now he does make some notes here about good practices with this image tag. And one thing I love about this documentation is that it always points out what you should be doing for best accessibility practices. Like here, it just gives you a friendly reminder, make sure you use your alt tag with the image. The next component I want to look at here is when I click add to cart, I have this message pop up. Now some libraries will call this a toaster notification. In this library, it's called an alert. And again, all of this styling is styling I've done myself. One nice thing is if I go into the dev tools, this is the alert, and it gives me this role of alert for screen readers. And then if I go in, this little X button on the side, it's kind of small, but it also just gives me by default this area label for the X button that describes what it does, dismisses the alert. And I'll show you what this looks like in code. So I have the alert in my app component, so it's globally available, and I just set it from my global Vuex state. But this prop dismissible is basically what gives me that X button with the accessibility options already set. And I don't have to do anything else. By using this dismissible prop, I can just click the X and it closes. Also, with this color, it's actually custom styling. From my global Vuex state, I have these alert details, and the color is success, which in most UI libraries, that means that it would be green. But since there's no styling that comes with this library, I've actually styled this success class here. So I give it a light green background, and this is the color of the text. What I also had to do is position it myself. And this is something I really wish they would include in the library. A lot of UI component libraries will let you do something like pass in top and right, and then it will display in the top right or something like that. And I know it makes it more flexible by not including those, but I think it would be a really nice feature because this is such a common use case for these alert pop-ups. So let me show you what it looks like without any kind of styles here. I'm just going to delete that and save it. And now if I click add to cart, you can see it actually showed up way down at the bottom here, just as another element on the page because there's absolutely no styling associated with it or absolute positioning that puts it, in the top or left or wherever it is on the page. I can still exit because that functionality is still there. The documentation for this does show you some styled examples like this, and it also does support automatically hiding the V alert. So like in the example, if you only wanted to show it for 10 seconds, it will disappear after 10 seconds, which is kind of nice. That's also a common use case for this. You can also choose the transitions here, and it gives you standard Vue.js transition options. Now let's talk about the draw menu, this menu that comes in from the side. Again, as you can probably tell, these are my own styles here, and this uses the VDraw component. So going along with the theme of accessibility, the user's keyboard will focus on it so they can do things like navigate around your links or whatever and use the escape key to close it. It's open right now here, and I'll hit the escape key and now it closes. That's something I hadn't thought of actually when I've used draws in the past, mostly because I designed them for mobile. But they're also used a lot in dashboards and other UIs now. Again, this is a pretty bare bones component. You can see I have this coming out of the right, but that's actually a prop that I set on this draw. So if I deleted this, then it comes out of the left by default. Of course, my animation comes in from the right still, so that looks kind of weird. I'm going to put that back. You can control the transition and animations from more props, and it's just a boolean in the V model whether the draw is open or closed. So the documentation does show you several different styled examples so you can get started with it. And it also gives you some other options like I showed you before, right aligned, but you can also prevent page scrolling, and it does show you, if you notice, when I open this up, it gives me an overlay here so it looks like the page fades because the draw component is putting a partially transparent element covering the whole page. So it gives you examples of how to do that, which is basically based off of these classes, this VTS draw class, and I'm setting the alpha. So there's 50% transparency on the page while the draw is open. Now, I do want to point out that the only reason that the draw closes when I navigate or when I click on one of the navigation links inside the draw is because I have this before each method on my router that actually closes the draw, because it looks kind of weird if that menu stays open even after you navigate to a new route. But the Vuetensils VDraw doesn't do that for you. So let's look at past purchases, which is a basic table. Now Vuetensils does give me table sorting out of the box, which is nice. And these arrows are there via a prop, so I didn't have to add them. If I look at the purchase table, it's this basic vtable component. And I pass it an array of headers, and I also pass it an array of products, and it will display them. I can give it a custom style, which I guess I'm not actually using the style at all. But you can see I really didn't have to do anything here to say that those columns are sortable. And also if you look in the HTML, it sets this area sort prop for me, so I don't have to worry about that. I think most people don't remember to do things like that when they make tables. Now, if you don't want one of the vtable columns to be sortable, they're basically sortable by default. But if you don't want them to be sortable, then you just set it as false and you won't get that sort option. And you can see this is the end of the page. There's really not a lot to the vtable. So you'd probably only use this if you're making a basic table. I'm sure it's going to be built out more, but for right now, that's pretty much it, what you saw on my page here. Now, in the past, when I've had to build client tables, they were much more complex than this. And using libraries like Element UI, where they have very robust table options, are super helpful. So I'm not actually sure if I would use this in real life, but it does give me some nice built-in features. Again, I really like the focus on accessibility just across this whole library. If I just wanted a styled table without too much functionality, then I think I could just add maybe foundation classes for that. And then I could get, nicely designed tables however I want to design them like that. So something like this would work really well with Vuetensils. Now for the cart page. Now these products on the side, they're just cards. Vuetensils does not have a card component, so these are just CSS classes from Foundation again. So this is where I'm using Vuetensils with the form here. Now Vuetensils has two different components that have to do with forms. It has VForm and then it has VInput. So let's start with VForm. VForm is actually a component that was added about a week ago into the library. Actually, as I was building this application and I refreshed the page and VForm was here. So VForm is a component that you basically use instead of the form HTML element. And right here it looks pretty much the same as you would use it for form, except there are just a few nice features that it provides that you wouldn't get from using just regular HTML. For example, it has this slot inside and it gives you this form object. Well, on this form object, there are a couple attributes and methods. So you can check things like, is the form valid? Yeah, you can see here. So it has these two options. So you can reset the form. So like if I type something in here, I can press reset. It goes back to the initial value. But if I want to clear all values in the form, I can clear it by using this form.clear method provided in the slot. All of this is wrapped in a form. If we look at the code real quick, you can see here is the VForm with just a submit. And then I have the form object here that I can access inside of VForm. And you can see I'm using it in a few ways here. So here I'm just printing out valid, dirty, or error. These are three properties I have exposed to me. And then I'm using form.clear for the clear button as well. So that's a method provided to me that I can call. And how do I know if it's valid? Well, I'm basically using default HTML attributes here. So required, min length, I'm setting all of these things on the inputs. And then that's going to determine if the form is valid or not. So here, I just clicked on an input and now I'm going to tab away. And now dirty, true, there's an error because this is required. So here, let me type something in. And now, of course, there's still an error and it's not valid because the email is not valid. So let me type in a valid email. And now the password is required and it has to be at least 6 characters long. So let me type it in. And now it says the form is valid and there is no error. I'll get into what I'm doing with the username in a second. If I want to clear the form, I can just hit clear. And you can see that only cleared the values. The form is still dirty, meaning the fields have been touched already. Just going to put something there. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here for a second. We're going to get to the VInput in 1 second. But I want to show you the Vuetensils GitHub. So looking inside the Vuetensils GitHub, you can go to Source, Components, and then see all of the different components and the code that makes up these components. So if you look at VForm, I think it's a good idea sometimes to look inside the GitHub, because sometimes there are things missing from the documentation or something you might not understand from the documentation that can all be explained by looking at what the code is doing under the hood. Like here, for example, I can see that this slot exposes these 5 things to me. So when I pull in form, I can do form.valid, form.dirty, form.error, etc., which I am using here in the default slot. I'm pulling in that whole object as form. One of the reasons why I was looking in here was because I was hoping there was an errors object or some kind of errors functionality. If you used other form libraries, then a lot of times they give you that errors object, like Validate or Redux forms or whatever you've used, and you can kind of loop through the errors and display them on the screen. This one doesn't. I don't know if that's a feature they're going to add, but I think it would be something nice to have in a form component anyway. Now let's look at this username, which is a VInput. So VInput allows you to set whatever input type you want, just as you would in HTML. For example, here you can set text, which is the default. You don't have to say type text, but this one sets type email, type text area, checkbox. The radio button's kind of interesting because if you look, unlike all of the other elements, this one has something called a field set around it, which is this border, which gives you a little bit more functionality in HTML, like being able to disable everything inside the field set at once. I'm really not sure why the radio buttons are using a field set and nothing else is. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that you always need at least 2 radio buttons. Maybe that is good practice, and if you know why that might be, then please leave it in the comments below this video. If I go here and look at the VInput component, and then this is where I can see what it's doing with the radio button and why it's different. If the type of VInput is radio, then display this, and if it's a select, display this, and then there's an else here for other types of inputs. It also gives you a slot to put in description for the input if you wanted to. What's interesting is that with these 3, the code came from the VForm documentation. So it gave me regular HTML with a label wrapping it, and then small text saying required, and then the input. And this is pretty much what the label is. So it looks like this, but I can't really pass that into the VInput though, because I can't pass in this HTML with small wrapping around it as a prop here. This is the label here. Now let me add a description to VInput and just see what that looks like. I'll just copy this default one here, and then in my code I'll get rid of the self-closing tag and then paste that here and see how this looks in description. Yeah, and it just passes it in as HTML below it. So that's how I would include HTML there. It's kind of interesting that the examples in form show HTML tags being used in the label, but you can't really do that for the VInput. Provides you a slot below it. VInput also says that it simplifies validation. So the validation that it's talking about is the built-in HTML5 form validation. So if you click this link, you can go to the Mozilla developer docs. Basically, it shows you that you can use things like required, min-length, type, and all the different validations that I've used here, plus some more. So for username here, I'm actually using another type of validation. I'm passing it the pattern prop. Pattern is another attribute that's part of the HTML5 validation API. It basically lets you use regex patterns for input validation. This VInput is not required, but if you type anything in the field, the only pattern that's valid is cat. If you type in anything else in the field, that field is going to be invalid and it will have an error. And then the submit button will be disabled because the form won't be valid. So let me make every other field valid. Okay, every other field is valid, but if I start typing here, now it's invalid again. So I'd have to get rid of everything, or I have to type in cat because that's the pattern that I want there. So you can do a lot with the pattern attribute in HTML. You can basically match any pattern that you want to, but you'll have to write the regex yourself, which isn't that easy or intuitive all the time. But you can also use a robust validation library like Validate with Vuetensils. So that's pretty much all I have about this library here. I am excited for the future of this library. And if you go here, you can see the roadmap and all the different features that they want to support in the future, as well as the improvements on the current features. So vtabs is a component they already have, and they have on the roadmap the improvements they want to make. If you want to contribute, Stegosaurus is very active and responsive. He's the author of the repo. And looking over the code, I think it's a pretty friendly repository to start contributing if you haven't contributed to open source before. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I have more Vue.js content and live streams in the pipeline. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as it really does help my channel grow. And if you want to support my work, then I've also left links in the description for ways which you can do that. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.